Lord, everybody. Didn't I tell you they were good? Man, I feel like we need to set up a tent and bring them. We'll bring this whole city out. I happen to know Mayor Coleman loves that style of music. I want to just share a couple of things with you because we believe in people getting involved here at Central. First, our baptismal candidates, Ileana and Duran, they are teenagers, and so they each have a shirt to be on the 614 team. And so 614 is called 614 Generation Rising. And so they're kicking off their worship experience. And then for our VOO members, the young adult age, amen, that's right, the rendezvous. Come on, say amen. Y'all want to talk about them when they're not in church. When they run in church, you need to say something too. All right? So thank you for that so much. We have these flyers in the lobby, and I want you to take as many as you want. For teenagers, you're going to be taking this flyer. It's called the 614, and then so it'll look like that. It's red and black, and it's got all the information. And the VOO flyer it has the chicken wings on it for the wings in worship, and I want you to take that one. On the back, the information on the back is the same. It's just a different name, 614 and VOO. Because on September 19th, there are three aspects of these ministries. There is the Shed. That's where they have something that's lighthearted to change hearts at the Super Chefs. And then they have the service. Once a month, they'll be engaged in a community service. And so on the 19th, we are taking all of the young adults and youth, and they are catering a meal at the Faith Mission Homeless Shelter. Well, not only are they catering a meal, but they are bringing the entire worship experience to the homeless families there. I got a call from the director from the Faith Mission Volunteer Coordinator, and she said that when we told the other groups what you all were doing that day, they said they would like to all cancel their programming and all show up when the VOO and the 614 come. So we want to know if you all have tables and chairs so that we can feed everybody outside, so that every homeless person in the city of Columbus will know that they have a hot meal on the 19th of September. I thought you'd say amen for that. I heard someone say one time that bumblebees should never really fly, that they're not engineered to fly. Bumblebees they have these large bodies and these small, tiny wings. And I remember one of my former presidents talking about another preacher. I said, man, I can't understand how this preacher keeps going. He's not the most good-looking guy. He's not very well spoken. And he said to me, that preacher is a bumblebee. The only reason he flies is because he doesn't believe anyone when they tell him he can. And I said to myself, man, I want to be a bumblebee. I want to fly because I won't believe that I can. How many of you know that there are things that happen in some people's lives that are spiritual, that will not allow some men to give up and fail in areas that other men have given up on and failed in? And these principles, when they are applied based on the Word of God in the life of the believer or the Christian, these principles will do the same thing in the life of the believer that they will do in the life of someone that has seemingly extraordinarily been gifted. So in other words, the principle of moving forward in spite of adversity and overcoming challenges, that is a principle that is true no matter who you are when you follow the Word of God. Have you ever met someone and they have no reason to smile, but they smile anyway? Have you ever gone to visit someone in the hospital or the nursing home and they give you more encouragement than you came to give them? Or have you ever heard someone's story and it's so horrific, you think to yourself, if that were me, I would have given up a long time ago. But that person is still going strong. You come in contact with these stories where it doesn't make sense, where it seems as though there is no plausible explanation. And this morning, I want to preach about that. I want to preach about those principles, and I'm going to explore it from the life of two different individuals in the Word of God. And it's a saying that my grandma used to say. I would get in trouble, and she would tell my parents, don't break his spirit, because my parents believed in the Word of God. And because they believed in the Word of God, they believed in the rod, spoken of in the Word of God. We have spoiled the generation because we have spared the rod for a generation. That's why at Central, every Saturday after church, we get free spankings in the parking lot. You're afraid to do it? We're going to build a tool shed just for spanking. Take them to the shed. Make sure you all do not put that on YouTube. I have other responsibilities and I can't say some things. But I remember my grandmother would tell my parents, don't break his spirit. And you know, mothers can spank daughters in a way that fathers can't spank daughters. And fathers spank sons in a way that mothers don't spank sons. There's an act of mercy that takes place. And so I didn't mind when my mother beat me, but when she would beat me and tell me, I'm going to tell your dad, I felt like I was having a heart attack. I had heart palpitations. Please don't tell Dad. And I remember my grandmother saying, and I get in trouble for doing this with Carla and Riley all the time, I said, don't break. My grandmother would tell my parents, don't break his spirit. And after I would get a beating, I would go in, and my grandmother was a Lucky Strike, no filter, smoking, vodka, drinking, cussing grandmother. And my grandmother would wink at me, and I would take my beating like a man, and I would walk in the room like this. And she would wink at me, and she would smile. And she would say, that's right, you can't keep a good man down. And this morning, I want to find out from the Word of God, what is it that keeps good men going when they have no reason to keep going? Let's pray together. Father, in the name of Jesus, I ask, Lord, that you would visit with us now and speak to our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I want to tell you about a man. Some scholars believe he was a young man and he was being groomed by the Sanhedrin. Anybody know what the Sanhedrin is? The Sanhedrin was the sect of spiritual leadership in the nation of Israel. You see, the nation of Israel at the turn of the first century, they were under Roman rule, but they were still allowed to celebrate the religious and national practices of their kingdom because they were a spiritual nation, but they were also a political nation that was in exile. They were captives of Rome. Okay? They were captives of whom? You've got to remember that. This young man was born in Rome. He was by birth a Roman citizen, but his lineage was Israeli. He was a Jew. He was a Hebrew national, but he was in captivity. When I say captivity, meaning his kingdom had been disbanded. So for all intents and purposes, he was a Roman-born Jew. He was a Roman-born what? Well, the Jews, you know who they are. They are the Israelites. Israel's name used to be Jacob. His brother was Esau. Their father was Isaac. His grandfather was Abraham. These were the children of Israel, the spiritual progenitors of the promises of God. This young man was born in Rome. And there are a great deal of theologians that believe he actually knew and came in contact with the works of Christ as a young man. But as he grew, the Sanhedrin groomed him to eradicate anyone that associated themselves with the man named Jesus. You see, Jesus was a rabble-rouser. He was a troublemaker in the sense that he came and undid the traditional teachings of the day. The traditional teaching said that you could not walk a certain number of steps on the Sabbath, the holy day of the week. You couldn't do or perform certain tasks on this special day. Jesus said, listen, I am the Lord of the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not created for the Sabbath. So he healed on the Sabbath. He forgave sins. And when he was questioned, who are you to have the power to forgive sins? He said, is it easier for me to say, rise, take up your bed and walk, or to say your sins are forgiven? I've got power to do both. You just choose which one you want me to do. So he made the spiritual leaders upset. They couldn't handle him. As a matter of fact, Troya, they couldn't handle him so much, my friend, that they decided that they were going to kill him. They did. On the 10th day of the month of Abib, or Nisan in the Hebrew calendar, they decided they would not eat until he was dead. And on the 14th day of that same month, 4 days later, Jesus was dead. But how many of you know that 3 days later, he rose? And the first person to tell all of his disciples and followers was a woman. That's why they need to ordain Pastor Hawley when it's time. Oh, y'all getting quiet. Somebody better say amen. Well, Jesus, how many of you know that he had some followers? It was one thing when he was alive and he was healing people and feeding thousands of people and telling storms to be quiet and raising folk from the dead. But it was another thing when he laid his life down and picked it back up again. So he told a woman in a graveyard, you let the boys know I'm back and I'm better than ever. So she ran and she told them, and they ran and they got to the grave, and Jesus was in fact risen from the grave, and he went to his Father in heaven to make sure that his sacrifice had been accepted. He stood in the gap for humanity. He paid the price for our sins. You ever get to the end of a meal and you know you don't have money, but you start doing this number? And you know you ain't got no money. And you're just hoping against hope. The person you're eating with says, I got it. Well, Jesus was that friend. Satan came and said, somebody's got to pay for this sin. And you and I, we start patting and feeling and stripping and doing everything we can to find enough to pay for the sins that we've committed. Jesus lifts his hand and he says, I've got it. And he winks at us as if to say, I know you ain't got enough money anyhow. Well, the word spread all over, Winston. It went all over Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth, that the healer, the carpenter, the one good thing that came out of Nazareth, the one they hung on a cross, buried in the ground, and picked his life back up again. He had disciples now. They called them apostles. Apostles meaning they planted churches. They established the church. There was no denomination. There was only Christian and Jew and Gentile were Christian the same. They were Christian. You were Jewish and a Christian. You were a Gentile and a Christian. Over time, the devil has polluted and diluted the word of God. And through the darkness of persecution, we have all types of different denominations and divisions of the body of Christ. But he says in the last days, there will only be one. And he says, when my sheep hear my voice, they will come running to me. Who was the greatest of these apostles? A young man born in Rome who was a Jew, who was trained by the Sanhedrin to kill, as they killed Jesus, all of the followers of Jesus. Because he was a young man, or may have been a young man when Jesus was killed, the Sanhedrin knew that they needed to raise up another generation of Christian killers. And he was the best they had. Mark, as a matter of fact, he was so good, just like the king Artaxerxes gave Nehemiah papers to give him free pass to go and rebuild Jerusalem. Saul, that's his name, born in Rome, but it was a Jew, trained by the Sanhedrin to eradicate Christians. Saul was given papers to travel as a Jew in places that Jews weren't welcome, with Roman authority to kill Christians. And those papers read something like this: The man bearing these papers, his name is Saul. We, as the Roman government, have given him the authority to come into this territory because we are sovereign around the world to kill Christians. And just as Christians gave us trouble in our kingdom, we killed their leader. We send now Saul to kill Christians in your territory. So Saul, he traveled all over. As a matter of fact, we do know without a shadow of a doubt that it was Saul in 34 AD that commissioned the crucifixion of a man named Stephen. Stephen was a follower of Christ. He was the very first Christian after Jesus Christ himself to be martyred for his faith in Jesus. He would have had his life. All he had to do was say, I renounce Jesus. There will come a time, and I know we don't talk about it, Elder Samuels, but remember back in the day we used to talk about it. There will come a time when Christians will be persecuted in this world. There will come a time when your liberty of conscience will be threatened and morality will be legislated. Meaning laws will determine religion. And that's the kind of time they were living in. And here, Saul was the one who showed his papers, his license to kill. And he said, take Stephen and bring him out in front of everyone. Because, see, his goal was to eradicate Christianity. But how many of you know you can't stop the unstoppable? And he said, I want you to stone him in front of everyone so that everyone who says they follow Christ, and listen, if you can't follow Jesus when you have the freedom to do so, what are you going to do when that freedom is taken away? He said, crucify him in front of everyone. Stone him to death so that everyone will know that we do not tolerate Christians in this city. He went on from there and he traveled. He got new orders to go to Damascus. Damascus is a region that neighbored Decapolis. You know of Decapolis because you've heard of the Gadarenes or Gennesaret, which is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus sent the very first disciples into Decapolis to spread the gospel. You know who they are. Mark chapter 5 calls them the demoniacs. They were the first ones to carry the gospel into Decapolis, and now Saul is going to that very same region to kill the Christians that Jesus established there when he healed the demoniacs. Come on, you didn't learn that, right? This is good. This is good to me. Saul is on his way to undo what Jesus did. And on the road to Damascus, Saul, who is given Roman authority, who is a Roman citizen, who is a Jew by blood, Roman by birth, on the road to Damascus, he is riding his horse. And let me tell you something. I get uncomfortable for people that ride their horse. They ride their horse to board meeting. They ride their horse to business meeting. They ride their horse to their job. They ride their horse to church. You know people I'm talking about? You ever see those people that ride their horse to church? They think that they are God. You mean to tell me all these people worshiping and you trying to figure out what's being done wrong? Can't you worship the Lord and then tell us what's wrong on Monday? People ride their horse to their house. It's a lot of wives that got horses. It's a lot of husbands that got some horses. There's a lot of kids that's got some horses. There's a lot of pastors that got some. I got a horse. When I ride them, you know it because I get knocked off real quick. God will put me in my place real quick. I'm dealing with all kind of brain trauma, and my leaders are trying to cover me and help me and make sure I got it right. And they're so patient with me. They know I forgot. They say, you probably didn't remember, Pastor. And they get so mad with them because they're patronizing me. Like, you know I got brain damage. Come on now. But here, that's why you have a good team. He's on his way to Damascus. And can I finish telling you this story so that I can begin talking about why you can't keep a good man down? Look at your neighbor and say, you can't keep a good man down. Can I finish telling the story? So here, Saul, who is born in Rome, who is given authority by Rome, but he's a Jew by blood, who was there when the first Christian was killed because he was a Christian. He wasn't killed because he lied, cheated, stole, robbed, beat somebody, stole something. No, he was killed simply because he said, I love Jesus. And God is so good that while the stones are coming at him, God makes sure he doesn't see the stones. And Stephen says, in the words that Martin Luther King quotes, mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Let me tell you how good God is. When Stephen wakes up at the first resurrection, he will continue to see what he was seeing when he was being killed. God gave him a glimpse of the second coming of Christ, so that Stephen, when he wakes up, he was comforted in knowing Christ was on his way. So when Stephen wakes up, he will say, I picked up where I left off. He's on his way, this Roman-born, Jewish by blood, Christian assassin, to Damascus to undo what Jesus did in Mark 5. And on his way there, he has soldiers that accompany him. And all of these men are, listen to this, they are trained by the Sanhedrin with the authority of Rome to do one thing, and that is to stop the growth of Christianity. And they do it in the name of spiritual authority. So while he's on his horse, riding to Damascus, he is knocked off of the horse onto the ground. A great voice comes from heaven, and he says, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? The interesting thing is that in other instances in Scripture, angels are dispatched to speak on behalf of heaven, like in Daniel chapter 7, where God dispatches the angel Gabriel, or in Revelation, where an angel of the Lord is dispatched to speak to John the Revelator. But here, this angel does not say, why do you persecute the Lord? Or why do you persecute our Father? This voice says, why do you persecute? Okay. So this Christian killing, trained by the church, Jewish blood, Roman-born assassin, is now talking to the head of the church. And Jesus says, why are you persecuting me? We understand that getting ahead of the story here. Saul is blinded by the glory of this encounter, and he asked his traveling companions, his co-assassins, if, because, everybody's got a co-assassin. You say she's crazy or he's crazy. They got crazy people that sign up with them to be crazy. They are co-assassins. We should have a seating arrangement for co-assassins in churches. Like, if you're here to kill the program, sit right here. I want to testify to you. We went down to Florida last week, and we did 10,462 driving miles this summer. And that does not count the flying miles in and out of the country this summer. As a matter of fact, I didn't even feel bad when my alternator went out on the van that was donated to us this week. I said, well, but something had to happen. We drove 10,000 miles this summer. And what made it so bad, the alternator went out, and we went to go and pick up the car, and we went to pick up the van where they were replacing the alternator. We cranked it up, and someone had stolen the catalytic converter. So if you took my catalytic converter, God's going to get you. And it was over on Cleveland Avenue, so I couldn't feel that bad. I knew the risk I took when I passed over 5th. When you got churches named Crack House, you know you're doing some ministry. You know you're doing some ministry. The Lord is calling us to Cleveland. Cleveland, not Cleveland, Ohio, Cleveland Avenue. We need Jesus on Cleveland. Anybody with me? All of y'all that used to live on Cleveland, just raise your hand. He say, I won't go back. I can't go back. So the catalytic converter was gone. So we got in the other car that was donated to us. Let me tell you how wicked we can be. We complaining about the catalytic converter on the donated car, and we get in another donated car to drive and go get a catalytic converter. God's been so good to you, you find reasons to complain. Oh, gosh, it's too good. He gave us 2 donated cars, and that's not good enough. When we crank up the car, we pull off the driveway, the relays in the second donated car go out. It feels bad until the beginning of the month when I don't have a car note. And so now we've got to crawl back to the place, and we get that, and I'm not even going to tell you the disaster we had with our house, but I'll tell you. Go ahead, since you asked. We decided to scale down and move from our loft downtown. We took Financial Peace University, and we want to lead by example. I tell you, that's not a leading I should have done. I should have stayed right in my loft downtown. I tell you the truth. I'd rather be broke than deal with what we had to deal with. But we got into the house, and we drove. We left 5 a.m. Sunday morning so that we could be at the picnic because the family ministries made me feel guilty. I wasn't going to be at the church picnic. Where is she? I want her to feel guilty this morning. And so we got to the picnic, and every time I travel, I try to bring something back from my elders. And people say, why you didn't bring me anything back? I got to work closer with my elders than you, so I got to, we got to be careful here. And I love them a little more here. But here we left, we moved into the house, and we got to the house, and we're excited, and I'm a man, so I don't do the things that you should do because I'm a man, and we don't have it all there. And my wife said, well, why would you move in? You don't smell that smell? And I said, well, what smell? And I said, well, now that you say it, I do smell the smell. And there was this smell in the cabinets. And let me tell you something. If there's a smell in the cabinets, you cannot get the smell out of the kitchen cabinets. And so we moved in, and we had to pay someone to come and help us move out so that they could take the cabinets out and strip the floors and restain the floors and redo the cabinets. And they said, we're not going to replace the cabinet, we're going to paint the cabinet. So we move everything in. So now the smell is still there, and the smell of the stain and the paint is there. So we're high and we're messed up. And I'm looking at Carla, and she's like, why are you happy? I said, because I got you, babe. And it was Cheech and Chong summer special all in the house. And so it's been a disaster. But you can't keep a good man down. And so this Jewish by blood, Roman by birth, trained by the church, Christian assassin is on Damascus, and he is blinded by the glory of his encounter with Jesus. There is no doubt in any theologian's mind that the voice speaking to him is Jesus Christ himself. As a matter of fact, it is the very last time Jesus directly speaks in the New Testament. Come on, isn't that good? It is the very last time that Jesus directly speaks, not as a member of the Godhead, but Jesus as the one who walked on earth as a man. He speaks. He says, why are you doing this? Just as sure as you saw how the Romans wanted to treat me and the Jews wanted to treat my followers, you also saw the great miracles that had been performed. For 3 days, Saul did not eat. He did not drink, and God spoke to a man named Ananias, and he said, Ananias, Saul needs you to go and pray for him so that he can be baptized into my work. And Saul is still Saul, and Ananias said, Saul is a Christian killer, God. I can't go and pray for a Christian killer. But God said, Ananias, you love me, don't you? Ananias said, I love you. And God said, well, I need you to go and pray for Saul and baptize him. So he goes, and when he prays for Saul, can I tell you something? He's blind for 3 days. Can I tell you something? Sometimes you're trying to figure out why things are going so bad in your life. What you don't realize is that God has simply turned you over to yourself so that you can see how dark your life is without him. And God has sent someone to pray for you, and you've got to let them in. Because when they do, the Bible says that when Ananias prayed for him, that something like scales fell from his eyes. The callousness of his heart, as symbolized in the scales on his eyes, had been removed. And in just 3 days, Saul, the Jewish by blood, Roman by birth, trained by the Sanhedrin to kill Christians and eradicate the Christian threat, is baptized. While we were in Florida, we did a 3-day evangelistic meeting. 48 people were baptized last week. That's why it bothers me when people say, oh, they're not ready. You've been in the church for 40 years and you're still not ready. And so he's baptized. And what does he begin to do? He begins to preach. He begins to go and preach. As a matter of fact, God uses Saul. He changes his name to Paul. He uses him to go and deliver the gospel to the most densely populated Asian region of the world. And Paul travels. As a matter of fact, he goes on to write 14 books of the New Testament. That's 14. Even Moses, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt, only wrote 5 books in the Old Testament. Paul writes more books in the entire Bible, and he was a Christian killer. Well, you would think when God gets a hold of you and God starts using you, then that's when things get good. But how many of you know that when you begin to follow God, you're trying to follow God, the light, to get out of darkness, and darkness and light can't dwell together, so it takes you through a storm of experience. When you follow the Lord, your life around you doesn't get better. The life within you gets better. The life around you gets messed up. People start going against you. You start losing things because those things were tied to your obedience to Satan. And when you disobey Satan, he takes away his blessings from you. That's why God says your blessings can't be in this world, because Satan is the prince, the authority of darkness in this world, and he has the authority to take what he wants from you. But you got to know, for everything the devil takes, he gives me permission to give you. Pressed down, shaken, and running over. So that's why when somebody takes the catalytic converter, you got to say, but God, I thank you for the car. You got to know when the alternator goes out, but God, I thank you for the other car. You've got to know when the house ain't right, it's because God's got something in store for you, and he's letting the devil take so that he could have permission to give. So Paul, he becomes the greatest apostle in the entire New Testament. He even says that I prayed 3 times for this thorn to be taken from my side. Here, what he's talking about, some theologians would agree with this. There are 2 lines of reasoning. There is the one that Paul actually had a physical infirmity, and we talked about this in prayer meeting a few weeks ago. You got to come to prayer meeting to get the good stuff. And thank you, Elder Jackson and elders, for all of the amazing prayer. I asked somebody how was prayer, and they said it was really, really good. And they said it like they didn't need me, and I felt a way about that, but I was just grateful that it was good. Just praise God, it was good. But he said 3 times I've prayed for this infirmity to be removed. He called it a thorn in his flesh. There are 2 lines of reasoning on this. There is one line of reasoning that Paul actually had a physical infirmity, okay? And that prohibited him from doing ministry the way he wanted to do ministry. It slowed him down some. Then there's another where the infirmity is not physical, but it is one that is socially structured. That because everyone knows who he is, he can't do ministry because they know where he came from. And he asked God to give him an opportunity for that to be removed from his ministry slate so that he could reach people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. In other words, Paul is saying, would you take away the past that these people hold against me so that I can reach them with the future you hold for them? But in 2 Corinthians 11, we see the story of a good man. He wasn't good all the time, and we don't measure good by someone's ability to be righteous, because even our best is like filthy rags. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul, he writes his story. His obituary is actually in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 through 8. That is the obituary of Paul. He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1 through 8, fight the good fight. He said, preach the word in season and out of season. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but they will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. Paul says, I fought the good fight. I finished my course. Now there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, and not for me only, but for all those that anticipate the coming of our Lord. That's his obituary. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he writes his memoir. Why don't you go there with me? Because I want to look at some principles on why you can't keep a good man down. Second Corinthians chapter 12. He says in verse 7, and lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. In other words, Paul was so full of the Holy Spirit. Listen to this. He was so full of the Holy Spirit that God allowed Satan to personally assign something to prohibit his ministry from being greater than it was. Can you imagine being so great that God's got to agree with the devil? I'm putting a cap on your anointing. Here, he says, for this thing I besought the Lord 3 times that it would depart from me. And this is where he quotes Jesus Christ. You know, he's heard his voice before, but he quotes him, and he says in verse 9 of 2 Corinthians 12, you know it, everybody say it together, my is sufficient for thee. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather, listen to this. This is the most powerful part of this passage. Most rather gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul is admitting, he's saying, listen to this, everybody. Are you paying attention right now? Because if you get nothing else in this sermon, you've got to get this. Paul is saying, I am better off when I'm weak than when I'm strong. Because the strength of God is made perfect in my weakness. How do you not keep a good man down? Why is it that good men just keep on going? They keep on trying. You would call them a failure, but they would say that was just the first attempt. Why are some people like that? Because they know that without being weak, they cannot be strong. Why can't you keep a good man down? Because a good man doesn't know what failure means. He always calls it the first attempt. And he keeps trying over and over again. Anybody ever heard of Babe Ruth? If you've heard of Babe Ruth, let me just lift your finger. Lift your finger. Because I'm going to lift your hand later. I don't want you to get tired. I asked that question. I asked some young people. I asked one young guy if you've ever heard of MS-DOS. He's about 17 years old, about 4 years ago. I said, you ever heard of MS-DOS? And he said, yeah, I think I have. I said, what is MS-DOS? He said, it's a band, isn't it? I said, no, MS-DOS is the foundation of every coding that makes up the internet, computers and software. But at any rate, Babe Ruth, he was called the home run what? The home run king. Do you know that Babe Ruth also held another title in his career? The strikeout king. Someone asked Babe Ruth, why is it that you, what do you attribute your being the home run king to when he broke the record? What do you think your success is from? He says, I keep swinging no matter what. In other words, he was the strikeout king and the home run king at the same time because he kept swinging at the ball no matter what. Drunk, sick, hurting, blind, can't see, can't tell if it's coming strike, if it's coming curved, if it's coming straight, if it's coming hard. He just kept on swinging, and he was able to become the home run king because he didn't mind being the strikeout king too. The strength of God is made perfect in weakness. How can you become an individual that cannot be stopped by failure? When you understand that failure doesn't stop you, it propels you forward. Paul says his strength is made perfect in my weakness, but I've got to finish his memoir for you to fully comprehend what Paul was dealing with. Paul says in verse 10 of 2 Corinthians 12, therefore I take pleasure in infirmities and reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. You got to stop having all the answers. You've got to stop knowing everything. Because it's when you're weak, God is strong. He says, I am become a fool and glorying. Ye have compelled me, for I ought to have been commended for you. For in nothing am I behind the very chiefest apostles, though I be nothing. In other words, Paul is saying, everyone is saying that I'm the best there has ever been. But the truth of the matter is, I'm nothing at all. How do you live your life so that nothing can stop you? How is it that you can take a beating in the shed and walk out and grandma can wink at you and say, that's right, you can't keep a good man down? How do you become that person? Humility. The first principle that is at work in the life of Paul is that Paul didn't mind failing. He was not afraid of failure. As a matter of fact, he didn't make decisions based on success. He made decisions based on failure. He said, the more I fail at this thing, the better God gets at it. The second thing that Paul had working for him was humility. He considered himself nothing, even though he is considered by most, if not all, the greatest apostle there ever was. Greater than Peter, greater than all the others, Paul. But he says, you call me great, I say I'm nothing. The second principle of continuing and pressing forward so people can't keep you down is humility. Why? Because when you give it away, nobody can take it from you. Did you hear what I said? When you lay yourself down and you allow yourself to be a walking mat and a stepping stool for others, and people say, well, you should get credit for that, and that was your idea, you've got to say, it does not matter because I'm nothing. If you fight for credit and you fight for authority, every person that fights to hold on to credit and authority and recognition, they lose it. But those that open their hands and they allow it to go freely, more comes to them. And so if you're fighting for credit and authority and rulership in your life, if you really want to experience the authority of God in your life, you better let it go. Be humble. He goes on to say, truly the signs of an apostle were wrought among you in all patience and signs and wonders and mighty deeds. For what is it wherein you were inferior to other churches, except it be that I myself was not burdensome to you? Forgive me this wrong. Paul is saying to them, he says, listen, if you feel that I have introduced truth to your culture and it is a problem for you, I'm sorry about that. But I'm doing what I was called to do. He goes on to begin to talk in verse 12. He says, I will very gladly spend and be spent for you, though the more abundantly I love you, the less I be loved. In other words, Paul says, I find myself loving you more the more you hate me. Let me tell you something. I'm not talking about that fake kind of love where you tell people I'm going to pray for you just because you want to make them mad. That ain't even real. God ain't going to bless you for that. You're going to be cursed for saying that anyway. Paul says, I love you. They say, we hate you. He says, I love you more. We hate you. I love you even more. We can't stand you. I love you even more. What's the third principle for not keeping a good man down? How is it that you can become a person that when you're attacked and you're ridiculed and you're betrayed and you're stepped over and you're ignored and you're oppressed and you're depressed and you're looked over and you're talked about and lied on? How is it? You love. You genuinely love with the love that Christ calls you to have for his children. And Paul says that the more you mistreat me, the more I am called to love you. And I will oblige the call of God on my life. How do you love? You serve. How do you love? You serve. You serve those that mistreat you and despitefully use you, and you do it without fear of rejection. You're not concerned about how they take it or what they say about you. Don't throw your hands up and say, I give up. Say, you know what? The more they throw this against me, the more I'm going to give to the cause of Christ in their life. Here, the Bible says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, in verse 20, for I fear, lest when I come I shall not find you such as I would, and that I shall be found unto you such as ye would not. Lest there be debates and envyings, wrath, strifes, backbiting, whisperings, swellings, tumults, and lest when I come again, my God will humble me among you, and that I will bewail many which have sinned already, and have not repented of the uncleanness and fornication and lasciviousness which they have committed. Paul is saying the fourth and final principle. He's saying to the Corinthians, he said, I'm going to keep on trying. No matter how bad it gets, I'm going to keep on trying. First and foremost, you cannot be afraid to fail. Second, you must be humble. Third, you must love. Fourth, you must keep on trying. You see, the grace of God is actually sufficient for all of our needs. And this morning, I know that some of you have, and I often preach about this because it's a burden in my ministry. There are things in my ministry I'm not happy about, places I wish I would have been, and things I wish I would have done. And I admit that to you, but I also admit that the greatest thing in the world is being in the will of God. And sometimes being in the will of God means you're not in your own will. Sometimes being on the way to do God's work means you're in the way from doing your own work. So what do you have to be an unstoppable tool in the hands of God? You cannot be afraid to fail. That means you're going to get out there and you're going to do things, and you're going to preach the gospel. You're going to share the gospel. You're going to give the gospel. You're going to email the gospel. You're going to text the gospel. You're going to Facebook the gospel. You're going to Instagram the gospel. You're going to Snapchat the gospel. You're going to kick the gospel. You're going to do it all. That doesn't mean you'll get a harvest. What it simply means is that you keep on swinging because you're not afraid to fail. You're going to keep on trying. You're going to try this idea. You're going to try that idea. And people are going to say, look at that bumblebee fly. Look at that bumblebee go. My daughter, when she sees bees, she begins to swat and run in a pattern. And she circles her hands and she tries to hit at the bee, and the bee cannot be hit. It can't be touched because that bee will not believe he shouldn't be flying. You can't keep a good bee from flying, and you can't keep a good man down. Don't be afraid to fail, church. Second, you have to have a humble heart. You have to know that the only reason God is using you because you're so messed up, he's got to use you to save other people just so that he can save you. You got to be humble. God doesn't call you because you're great. He didn't call your education. He didn't call your bloodline. He didn't call your heritage. He didn't call your gifts, your tools, your equipment. He didn't call you for what you've got. He's called you for what you don't have. So be humble, friend. And you got to remember one thing. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. To whom much is given, much is required. Thirdly, You got to love. If you've never been loved or you've never loved in the way God wants you to experience human love, that's all right because he shows you. He pours love into your life. You begin to love people that are unlovable. You begin to serve people that shouldn't be served. You begin to do things that don't even make sense, and you're doing it out of a passion for them. My mother was a hospice nurse for 42 years. I joke with my mom. I said she's the worst nurse in the world. She said, why would you say that? I said, because you lost every single one of your patients. She said, I didn't lose them, son. She said, I served them. And that means they won. And it means I won. She dedicated her life to making people comfortable that were going to die. And she loved them. They would invite us to her house, to their homes. I never forget, my mom said, if you see roaches in your water, you better hold the roaches back and put that water to your lips. Because you will not take these people's dignity. You will keep their dignity intact. If they smell bad, you will hug them. If they're not shaven, you will kiss them on their cheek. Because you will keep their dignity intact. My mother taught me to love through her own life. Don't be afraid to fail. Have humility, love. And how do you keep on going when they kick you in the teeth, when they jab you in the stomach, when they stab you in the back? I joke with my father-in-law. He says sometimes church work, you walk out of a meeting and you see blood everywhere and you didn't even realize you got cut. They say, well, when did this happen? But you got to keep on trying. I think we should go, I think we should try, and you just keep at it. You keep pressing. And all of a sudden you find that you start lifting up off the ground. And where you kept trying and you kept pushing and you kept pleading, it starts coming together. And all of a sudden you've got something working for you. And people start looking around. They say, isn't that old hot Johnny? Isn't that drunk Susie? Isn't that prostitute Charlie? And they look at you and they say, isn't that a drug addict over there? And they don't know that God got a hold of you. They don't know that on your way to do the devil's work, God got into your heart. They don't know that you're keeping on and pressing on because you will refuse to give up. Keep on trying. So that when the story is done, they will not call you the Roman born, the Jewish bred, the Sanhedrin trained assassin. They will call you the author of 14 books of the New Testament. They will call you the greatest apostle of all time. They will call you the missionary to the world. So, friend, this morning, I want you to know that it's God's amazing grace that you're here. And if you want people to say you can't keep that man down, you can't keep that woman down, you got to let that grace work in your life.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. Jesus did, that grace appeared. The hour I first believed.
All together now, you know this song, Amazing Grace.
My chains are gone.